I haven't been on the office.
Okay, let's get going. So we do have some people online. Oh, what did I just do? There we go. It's such a weird time right now. Students coming to class on the Zoom, which, you know, if they have COVID, I don't want them here, so I'm okay with it. It's weird, my daughter this morning on the way to the bus, like, I don't feel well, I'm gonna stay home. And normally I would say, no, you gotta go to school. But now with COVID times, no, you stay home until we know you don't have COVID. It's just a weird time. Okay, so we're going to, I think I like this pace that we're doing. We'll do the presentation for the PowerPoint first, then take a break and then do the presentations and then do the quiz. I think we'll continue to do that. Today we'll do the PowerPoint a little bit slower because we're going to do chapter 8 today and Thursday. So we'll just go a little bit slower on it. Who's planning on doing a presentation today? Anybody else? I think Janet online is going to as well. I think I got an email to that effect. So we'll see how that goes, but we'll do that after the break. Okay, at the break or before you leave, if you have chapter 7 practice problems, put them up here. I haven't graded what you turned in so far, but I will post today on Moodle the answers for practice problems 1 and 3. And I encourage you to look over those compared to yours when I hand them back. Remember, when I look through your practice problems, I'm just glancing at them to make sure you're on the right track. I'm not grading them. So to really get the actual value, compare what you did to the practice set, the sample answers. And then on Thursday, I will take any remaining chapter 7 if you haven't turned them in yet. But then starting next week, I want to get back on track where they're due, as Moodle says, on the Tuesday. Okay. All right, let's start talking about unemployment and inflation. Raise your hand if you have a job right now. Okay. Are these jobs you have as student workers on campus? Anybody have an off-campus job? Okay, a couple of you. Yeah, okay. Okay, raise your hand if you didn't raise your hand. If you don't have a job. You're just a student. Okay.
Wait, I used to have.
But right now, this week, are you going to go to an employment? Okay. Are you unemployed? Sounds cute. Are you unemployed right now? Yeah. Anybody else? If you don't have a job, are you unemployed? Yeah. You think you're unemployed?
I was going to say, like,
yeah.
Since we're 16 to 19, or at least I am, is it not?
No. Good thinking though. There is some age considerations, but not 16 through 19. Well, we're going to go over today why you are not unemployed. I'll just give you a hint. Because you're students. Students are not counted as unemployed unless they are looking for a job. Let's get into what's going on with that. Okay, so unemployment is a data metric that we use to count how many people are not working. There's some technical definitions of this we'll go into, but essentially, if you want to work and you're not working, you are unemployed. And you can see the rate of unemployment here, graph from 1948 to 2017. And you can see it hovers for the most part between 4% and 8%, went up to pretty high here. As you can see, the purple areas are recessions. So unemployment goes up with recessions. It goes down with the boom in the business cycle. That makes sense. Recessions mean people lay off workers or not hiring. This one in the 80s when it went up so high. I mean, I doubt anybody knows much about this in this classroom. I was barely alive, you guys weren't. But this was stagflation. This was a very bad time in our economy, a double dip recession. And as you can see, in the non-recession time, we did not have a decrease in unemployment. Okay, so we look at what the unemployment rate is the total percent, or the percent of the total number of people in the labor force who are unemployed. Right? It says labor force. So what's a labor force? All workers, employed or unemployed. All workers. What a weird way to phrase that. Not all people, not all citizens, all workers. So back, you said age range. So 16 through 19 wouldn't be considered here because those are within our worker range. But a 6-year-old is not a worker. I mean, that's illegal now, at least in the United States. So all workers. And the labor force participation rate is the percentage of adults 16 and older. All right, so we're gonna cut that line at 16. Now, you can work in most states below 16. Most states 14 and 15 can work limited hours, and under 14 can work in farming jobs. But generally 16 is the cutoff for being in the labor force. Okay, so measuring the labor force participation rate. The percentage of the adult non-institutionalized civil population who are working or actively looking for work. Any idea what non-institutionalized means? Anybody have any thoughts on what that could be? Yeah.
People aren't, like, I don't know how to explain it. People aren't in the.
I think what you're getting at is people that are not in an insane asylum,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
oh, hey, this is academic environment. We use precise language, even if it's insensitive. No, yeah, it is. I can't remember if the book actually defines non-institutionalized, but yes, that's what it means. It means people that are not in prison, people that are not in locked up in hospital, mental or physical hospital. You know, people that are not locked away from working. So it's really simple. You take the labor force and divide that by the population age 16 or over. Labor force. Labor force, remember, is all workers. Employed or unemployed, all workers, not all people, all workers. And you divide that over the population 16 or older times 100. Okay, so that's to get the labor force participation rate. Now, what's unemployment rate? Well, we take all unemployed workers and divide that by the labor force. Interesting. Okay. But before we move on, I'm curious what you guys think about this labor force participation rate. Labor force, which is all workers, divided by population age 16 or older as a percentage. Anybody have a guess what this might be on average, or right now, or last year? Just, is it 10%, 50%, 90%? Yeah.
93%. 93%.
93%. So if that were the case, then 90%, 3% of all people in the United States would be a worker. They'd be an unemployed or employed worker. And 7% would be institutionalized or some other form of non-working. Does that sound right? Okay. Anybody else have a guess? Yeah.
Like 50 to 60%.
Yeah, why do you think that?
Because there's a lot of elderly people who are unable to work and also a lot of institutionalized people.
Okay. Yeah, so this is much closer. I don't know exactly what it is now, but people forget. So your reasoning is great because that's exactly what it is. There's 350 million people in this country. Well, 75 million are children. So they're not workers. I don't know how many are elderly, retirement age. There's what about like housewives? Are they a worker? Or they work, but they're not. Are they a worker? If you staying home for the next 20 years to raise kids, are you a worker? Well, no, you're not. Now, if you remember from last week, we account for the value of that work through imputed wages and GDP. But when it comes to labor force, if you're not working, if you're not earning a paycheck or don't want to earn a paycheck because you're a working mother, non-working mother, staying at home with the kids, you're not part of the labor force. So it ends up being the labor participation rate is about 50% of the country. So why is that important? Well, that's important because when we look at the unemployment rate is the number of unemployed workers as a ratio of labor force. So if the labor force is if it's only the workforce, and we know from this that it's only going to be about 50%, then we're talking about the unemployment rate is a small percentage of that already small percentage of total population. Good. So what do we like to use unemployment numbers for? Well, if you're unemployed and you hear unemployment rate is really high, it's a good indicator that it's going to be really hard for you to find a job. If the unemployment number is low, it's a good indicator that there's lots of jobs. So that's a good indicator of how easy or difficult it is to find a job given the current state of the economy. But it's just an indicator. It's not the end all be all, because even if the labor market is really healthy, let's say unemployment, like right now we have an unusually low unemployment rate. Is that a true indicator of the health of the job market or the economy? Well, no, because it could take time to find a job. It could take months to find a job, and in that time you're unemployed. Even if everyone's hiring, it's a process. Interview. Companies have to approve the job, advertise it, get candidates, interview, pick somebody, onboard them. This takes months, and in that time you're unemployed. And vice versa, in this current economy, the unemployment rate can be really low right now, but the new wave of Omicron hits and everyone's laying off people left and right, and that takes time to represent it in the unemployment rate. The other thing that it doesn't incorporate is you're not unemployed if you've given up looking for a job. You're only unemployed in this country for the unemployment rate if you're looking for a job. If you've given up because you want to be a stay-at-home mother, you're not unemployed. If you've given up because you're close to retirement age, so you just decided to retire instead of finding a job, you're not unemployed. If you've given up and you start buying Oxycontin on the table and just giving up on life, you don't want to work, you're not unemployed. We saw a massive drop in labor participation rate this recession and the previous recession, the Great Recession. So in the Great Recession, it was really weird because the unemployment rate went sky high. And it didn't go down for a couple of years. And when it did go down, the weird thing is, if you looked at the labor participation rate, that was not holding steady. That was going way down too. So it wasn't that jobs are coming back, it's that people just started giving up. And at that time, I was in a law practice where I had some visibility over unemployment and Social Security disability claims. So Social Security disability is everyone, because we're taxpayers, if we become disabled, we can claim Social Security payments. And and if you do that, you can't work because you're saying, I can't work. I need Social Security payments because I can't work because I'm hurt. And we saw a huge increase in those. So what people were doing, they couldn't find a job. So they just started, oh, my back hurts, I can never work again. And we're going on Social Security disability for the rest of their lives. All right, so there's more problems with this model here. There's also discouraged workers. It's kind of like what I was just saying, although if you go on Social Security disability, you're saying for the rest of my life, I'm never going to work. So you're not really discouraged. Discouraged is temporary. Discouraged is, I can't get a job right now. Why bother? I'm going to stay home and smoke weed. Which is legal now, right, in Oregon, so that's okay. Yeah, so discouraged workers, why bother? I'm just going to stay at home. So you're no longer unemployed officially. You're out of the unemployed statistics. And the deeper that recession, the more discouraged people are. So think about how that's affecting us right now. The Great Resignation, people quitting, it's happening right now. A lot of this is just discouraged workers. They're fed up, they're tired of their jobs suck, and why go back to work? So they can get laid off or they can get sick. Why go back to work if unemployment checks are higher than normal? So we saw a large part of people drop out of the labor force because they're discouraged. Okay, and it is marginally attached. So they're available for work. Maybe they're looking for work, or they were looking for work, but they don't really care. And the best model I ever see of this is the homemaker, the stay-at-home parent, that maybe their children are starting a little bit older, maybe going back to school, and they think, oh, maybe I should get a job. And they throw out some resumes. But they don't really care. They're just kind of marginally attached to the workforce. Something comes along, they'll take it. Otherwise, they'll continue to be a stay-at-home parent. Okay, and then underemployed. People who work part-time jobs because they cannot find full-time jobs. So underemployed is not part-time work. It's people that can't find full-time work. So they're working part-time. And maybe they have multiple part-time jobs. Yeah, this is I got laid off at Nike and I can't find full-time work, so I'm going to work part-time at Starbucks because then I have some income, and Starbucks actually pays part-time workers health insurance. So if you ever go to a Starbucks around here, you see this a lot. I say Nike because over in Beaverton, where I live, Nike goes through, it's the biggest employer. Well, Intel's the biggest, but Nike is one of the biggest. And they go through rounds of layoffs every couple of years. And after a round of layoff, you have these 40-year-old, 50-year-old people working at Starbucks all of a sudden because Starbucks will provide health insurance to you and your family for cheap if you work like 22 hours a week or something like that. So you can know when Nike's having layoffs by how many older people are working at Starbucks around there. Okay, so the official unemployment rate, I think it's called U6. It's been a while since I looked this up, but that's only one measure of unemployment. There's other measures. So you can see some here. The dark purple line at top is unemployment, including all the marginally attached and involuntary workers. All right, then you see the more of the true picture of unemployment, with the lowest line here being the actual, what we consider unemployment rate, the U6, which is the lowest of the three, which excludes students and discouraged workers and marginally attached. It's the lowest, but then you start adding in these other areas, and it goes way up. So if you include over this time frame, so the Great Recession here, if you include everyone that was actually unemployed, discouraged workers and marginally attached and part-time, look at the unemployment rate. This is Great Depression area. Almost 20%. Almost 20% of the people that wanted to work during the Great Recession were underemployed or unemployed. Me being one, I graduated grad school right here and went from being not unemployed because I was a student to unemployed overnight to the worst unemployment rate since the Great Depression. I used to tell students that to get their sympathy. You guys, however, hopefully won't be, but you guys might be graduating into another bad because of this pandemic. And I mean, things are good right now, but we'll see if it's a double dip. Okay. So, yeah, so the unemployment rate by itself is not a great indicator of anything. Well, if sophisticated people and economists will use these other factors, like labor participation rate. Like I said, in the Great Recession and also in this recession, the labor participation rate tanked. So when you just look at unemployment rate, it's not factoring in people that are just quitting the job market. I don't have the numbers handy for this past year, but I would imagine our current unemployment rate, which is really good, is not giving the whole picture. I bet the participation rate is flatlined. Right? It also doesn't factor in average wages. So that's another thing that's going on right now. So when this book was published, this is kind of like an academic thing. But right now we're seeing this revolution in wages. Because the unemployment rate, it doesn't indicate this, but what's happening is the people were in they're in the job force, labor force, but they're saying, I'm not going to come to work unless you pay me more. And we're seeing wages go way up across the country, which is how it should be, supply and demand. That's what we learned in chapter 3. For the first time in generations, supply and demand was actually working when it's coming to wages. So the unemployment rate also has this problem that it doesn't accurately represent subgroups. So as you can see here at different points in time, represented by the different colors, overall versus African-American versus white teenager versus African-American teenager. So in 2010, when those unemployment numbers were so bad, 9.4 overall. If you were African American, you were there's 15% of African Americans unemployed. White teenager, 23%. And look at this, almost half of Black teenagers that wanted a job could not get a job in 2010. What about when the numbers appear to be really good? 4.3 overall, 2017. 27% of Black teenagers can't get a job. So the unemployment rate does not indicate that. Okay, so I mentioned 1980, the double dip recession. That's what's called a jobless recovery. This is this idea that when the recovery comes, after the recession, we lose all the jobs in the recession, the recovery comes, but job growth doesn't come with it. So we're in the boom cycle of the economic cycle, but there's no jobs. So you can see this happening. You see it right here, right here. You see right here, 90s, Gulf War. Unemployment kept going up after the recession was over. All right, that's bad. That's a jobless recovery is often talked about after a recession, and it's a really bad thing. Okay, so more data. And generally, there's a negative relationship between the economic growth and the unemployment rate. Right? Negative meaning when there's growth, unemployment rate goes down. Right? Because unemployment, again, high is bad, low is good. Growth, high is good, low is bad. So it's an inverse relationship. So this is what we like to see. All right. So here is a change on this axis is a change in unemployment rate. So zero means it's not unemployment zero, it means there's zero change. Positive change, negative change. And then over here is growth rate, real GDP growth rate. Right? Zero change, negative change, positive change. So what we would like to see, higher this way, lower this way. Right? Good, good. So good. But this and this is bad. So then we see some of our worst recessions, 1980, 2010, that's what we see. 1950, really bad, really high growth, really good unemployment. Right? That was a good time to be alive. Right? Because we bombed out the rest of every other country in the world, so they couldn't make any things, and then suddenly we had lots of jobs. Yeah, so this was kind of an unusual situation. So we're going to bomb everyone again. Okay. Yeah, so that's what I was alluding to you guys. Unemployment is particularly bad for recent grads. You don't want to be timing up your graduation with the end of a recession. So if there happens to be an end of a recession when you guys get to your final year, maybe extend it and do an MBA because you don't want to be getting your first job when no one wants to hire. It'll actually lower your lifetime earnings. There is a direct correlation between graduating into a recession, into a bad job market, and lower overall lifetime earnings. And if you're curious how that works, is because there's no market rate for pay like you think there is. What it is you negotiate the best salary you get when you get out of a job, and then unless there's some dramatic, unusual change in your career, Your next job will be 10%, more than you're making now. The next one will be 10% more. So if you start off lower than everyone else because you graduate in the recession, then the percentage increases are always off a lower number. So anyway, what this graph is showing is that men and women, it separates out by men and women, and you have different unemployment for new grads. You can see how recessions affect it. Because no one wants to hire. I mean, it's hard enough to get a job as a new grad. You don't know anything. No practical experience. Okay, we'll do a couple more slides here and then we'll take a break. All right, so we have the so some unemployment is natural. Natural meaning it's just going to happen. There's nothing we can do about it. There's no government policy we can do to get rid of it. We don't even want to get rid of it. So as this statistic shows, in the last 15 years, we never had an unemployment rate less than 2.9. Right? And that's good. If there was no unemployment, it makes it really hard to change jobs. Like having the ability to having jobs that need to be filled and being able to quit a job, which causes unemployment, right? That's a good thing. So there's 3 types of unemployment. There's frictional, structural, and cyclical. Yeah. So before we get into those definitions, this is just showing this kind of this movement of jobs, the cycle, right? So you have people, they're not in the labor force, they're out of the participation rate, but they decide to come back in. Or they leave. So in this statistics, this metric, 4.43 million decided to get a job, leave in a workforce again, but 4.27 left. Why? Maybe they retired. Maybe they were injured. Maybe they just hated their boss so much they quit and never want to have a boss again. Same kind of cycle for unemployed and employed, and then unemployed to not in labor force. The other thing with this leap here is this is all also this is retirement, but this is all people coming of age and getting their first job or getting a job after being a student. Okay, so let's talk about frictional. Frictional. So this is what's caused when unemployment is due to the time workers spend in the job search. This is that friction, call it friction, because it's that friction between you want a job, you're looking for a job, and the actual time it takes to do that. So the job you're going to eventually get first has to be approved by the company hiring it, and it has to be, budgeted for and then advertised for, and then they pick a bunch of recruits or candidates and they interview them, and you go through that and you interview for other jobs, and this process takes months. That's the frictional nature of it. It's just the friction of just normal things not lining up perfectly. So the shortest duration of unemployment for most workers suggests that unemployment in 2017 was mostly frictional. All right. So the biggest chunk is 5 to 14 weeks, followed by, or no, biggest is less than 5 weeks. It's going this way. So 5 weeks, 5 to 14 weeks, 27 weeks. Right. So less than 14 weeks is the vast majority of unemployment in 2017. So what is 14 weeks? 3 months, 3.5 months? Well, that sounds about like the average time for a professional worker needs to get a job. So this sounds like it's I got laid off or I quit, and it took me about 3 months or less to get a new job. You start going over here, 27 weeks and over. Well, what's 27 weeks? That's half a year. That starts sounding like something else. That 27 weeks and over might be structural. So where frictional was the system works great, it just doesn't line up perfectly. It just takes time to get a new job. Structurals where there's a problem with the actual structure of the job market. So more people are seeking jobs in particular labor market than there are jobs available at the current wage rate, even if the economy is at the peak business cycle. So what we're seeing right now is partly structural because people don't want to work for $7 an hour. I mean, you went to Oregon, but in most states, $7 an hour. So you can be harassed and get COVID and work really hard and not be able to work from home, right? So that's a structural issue. Structural is also things like, you don't know how to use Excel. And every job, every office job, it requires you to know Excel. So you don't have the skills. That's why no one's hiring you. It's a structural thing. You know how to dig coal in West Virginia, and the coal industry is declining. So you don't have the skills to go be a programmer in Silicon Valley. That's structural. All right, so labor unions can cause structural. Efficient wages, right? What's an efficient wage? It's wages that employers set above the equilibrium rate as an incentive for better employee performance. So if minimum wage for working at, at a fast food restaurant is $15 an hour, why would some restaurants pay 18? Like I go to Chick-fil-A or I go to Five Guys, kind of a little bit higher end fast food restaurant, and they have a sign out hiring at $18 an hour. Why would they pay more than minimum wage if they could find people that, because they want a better person. So they set an efficiency wage. Side effects of governmental policies. Like, for example, when the pandemic hit and they doubled unemployment, the benefit, extra $600 a month. That was a government policy. It was well advised. It was a good thing. But a lot of people are like, well, why would I go to work if I can make more on unemployment? That's a side effect of government policy. Okay, unions. So unions are this thorn in the side of an efficient market. So it's an association of workers that bargains collectively. So all the employees at a factory get together and say, hey, if you get fired, we're all going to quit. So that they join their power together. If you don't get a raise, we're all going to stop working for the day. Right? Well, that causes a structural problem because frictional unemployment happens because the company can let go of a particular person, or that person can quit, and then they'll find the next job they can get, and the company will hire the next person they can hire, and it's just a small friction. Becomes structural if the company can no longer lay off one or two people they need to. Unions also artificially increase wages above the efficiency wage. So I'm very pro-union. I'm extremely pro-union, but these are the flaws with unions. Okay, so this is the supply and demand curve when it comes to employment, how structural employment works. So here is the equilibrium. Wage rate and quantity of labor, right? So they find their balance. So this would be the balance of high-end fast food workers, like the Chick-fil-A, the Five Guys level of fast food worker, maybe $18 an hour. At $18 an hour, so people looking for jobs and companies find the right balance. But then if the Chick-fil-A is all unionized, the workers unionized, and they demanded $20 an hour, this is what you would have. You'd have this structural gap. A gap between the amount that workers are willing to supply of labor and the demand from the companies wanting to hire them. This was also unemployment. We had an extra $600 a month last year on unemployment. Without that $600, workers would have been willing to work for, say, the equivalent of $800 a month. And then now they're getting $1,400 a month. So why would they go? They would not want to take a job that was paying less than $1,400 a month, creating a structural gap. Okay. So minimum wage is a price floor. We talk about that later in a later chapter. The evidence suggests, though, that minimum wage does not create a negative drag as a structural problem, even though technically it's a structural problem. The evidence shows that it's a boon to our economy. Okay, let's take a break. Let's come back at 45 after, and we'll do our presentations and then the quiz. All right, we have everyone back. Okay, so we are going to do our presentations now. We're going to start with Janet on the Zoom. So she's sharing her screen. I'm hoping we can hear it. Janet, can you talk to see if we can hear you?
Yes.
Ah, there we go. Okay.
Trying to
Well,
present.
Yeah, the floor is yours.
I'm trying to make it bigger, sorry.
We can. It's pretty good just like that. If you want to go ahead with like that.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can hit F5 on your keyboard.
Oh. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, that's fine. So hi, my name is Yannette. I'm going to be presenting on the intro, which is China Hits the Big Time on chapter 7. So this little intro on chapter 7 is basically about how China is becoming the world's biggest city, and that's been leading to it also having a large economy. And although it seems that it may have the same economy size as the US, it's slightly different. It's still big, just slightly different. And the way that they measure and compare these two different economies is by using the GDP and the real GDP measures, which we've previously talked about in class, but I will go ahead and read these definitions. So the gross domestic product is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a year. And down here I have the equation for that. And then the real GDP is the total value of the final goods and services produced in the economy during a year, calculated using the prices of a selected base year. Yeah, and then we have the nominal GDP, which will come into play later on. But it's the value of all final goods and services produced in the economy during a given year. It's calculated using the prices current in the year in which the output is produced. So that's just a little bit of the intro of what the chapter will be talking about, focusing on the GDP, real GDP, and nominal GDP. Then I also got into chapter 7, where it talks about economics in action and the miracle in Venezuela. So In recent years, Venezuela has had one of the world's fastest growing nominal GDPs. So between 2013 and 2016, the nominal GDP of Venezuela grew up 1,200%, while the US had a growth of only 11%. And while that may seem like a good thing, it's actually not, because it just means that the economy is really messy and that things aren't doing well. So the price of oil has been plunged due to government policies and other political issues, misunderstandings along the way, which has caused to shortages of consumer goods. So due to that, the GDP fell approximately 19% from 2013 to 2016, and that's the real GDP. So this has also cost the government to lose much of its revenue, since the oil was is the country's main export. So what they decided to do in order to try and fix the economy was that they decided to print more money, which maybe when we're like 5 years old, it makes sense, just print more money, but it's not good because it's just causing an accelerated inflation. So Venezuela is an example of how important it is to distinguish between the nominal GDP and real GDP. So even though their like regular nominal GDP seems to be good and stable and like, oh, it's growing rocket high, the real GDP shows that it's actually falling, and there's not much that they can do currently to fix it. They're trying. So yeah.
All right, great, thank you. Venezuela, a really interesting country. It's people like to use it as an example of why socialism or communism is bad, but it's not a great example of that because it's not real socialism, communism. It's a totalitarian state. It's not a command economy, because to make a command economy, you have experts doing the commanding. There, it's just a dictator, and people don't know what they're doing, and using it for political power. Okay, great. So now we're going to do pull up the next one. Oh. All right. Nicholas, do you want to come up? All right, let me get everywhere. Okay,
Nice.
So remind us what you're going to talk about and then talk about it. Oh, oops, I hope I didn't break my phone.
Hello, I'm Nicholas Hilson, and I'm here to talk about indexing to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, and the business case betting on bad numbers. And basically, for the indexing to the Consumer Price Index, the gross domestic product is important to shaping economic policy. However, the GDP does not have a direct impact on people's lives, unlike the Consumer Price Index has on people's lives, basically. And the Consumer Price Index has a direct impact on millions of Americans, as many payments are tied, or in other words, indexed to the CPI. So payments rise and fall as the CPI rises and falls. So if the CPI is lowered, then the payments to those Americans are lowered, basically. And the start of indexing payments goes back all the way early to like the early foundings of the US in Massachusetts, as the Massachusetts state legislator realized they needed to increase the soldiers' pay as inflation occurred during the Revolutionary War. So to counteract this inflation and to help increase soldiers' pay, they adopted a formula basically that make the soldiers' pay proportional to the cost of a market basket of that time, which is later on what the market basket hypothesis is, which based in that day would be consisting of 5 bushels of corn, 68 4/7 pounds of beef, 10 pounds of sheep's wool, and 16 pounds of shoe leather, basically. And this is kind of like the weight of the CPI in the photo. Then more summary, the CPI is used to calculate official estimates of inflation rate used to adjust payments that become, for example, Social Security and other benefits you receive from the government, which around 16 million Americans receive and accounts for nearly 1/4 of federal spending. So around 60 million Americans from Social Security are affected by the CPI. And then income tax brackets and benefit income are kind of the CPI, in the private sector doesn't follow CPI, but it's something similar. And it's not here, but the CPI is kind of a public number, but it's super politically sensitive. So they have to craftily adopt a formula that can accurately like create a good balance and payment for the Americans, because so many Americans are affected by what the CPI has basically does for them. And then why was this presented? There's a reason why this economics in action was featured as a show. The consumer price index affects millions of Americans and how payments rise and fall based on the CPI. And this topic is important as to understand how the CPI was formed and how it relates to inflation, which will be covered in chapter 8, and also how taxes and transfers are basically bracketed to where higher income people pay a higher tax rate, or lower income people will pay a lower tax rate. And then the economic principle here in play would be principle 12, how the government policies can change spending because how they affect how the spending Americans and how the formula changes. So it will increase the payments, etc. Another principle is the hypothetical consumption bundle, which a market basket is used the method to change in overall price levels. And then my other topic was business case betting on bad numbers. And basically in early 2016, many financial players in the world were looking at the Chinese economy and basically thought that they were going to soon enter a recession. So they really wanted to, and they were worried about the political instability because the Chinese citizens were apparently losing prosperity. And then they felt that it would fall, even though the Chinese economy had a growth rate of 6.9% in 2015, and basically were projected to have similar growth. However, a Chinese official, Li Qiang, pictured here, told the US ambassador basically that the Chinese official GDP figures were man-made, aka they were altered to fit a better picture for the citizens. And it looked like the economy was not slowing, improving. And he basically gave 3 indicators not present in the national account to give an indicator of how the economy is doing through railway shipments, electricity consumption, and loans dispersed by banks. And then basically for businesses operating in China, it's standard to have independent estimates of the Chinese economy since they fiddle with the numbers and not present an accurate picture of the Chinese economy. And basically these independent estimates became the leading index for data on trade with China's neighbors. And these results of the estimates that were conducted show that there was a sharper slowdown in China's economy than the numbers that the Chinese government released for their official reports. And then I also searched up on like other parts. They said this was part of China's official plan, however, by switching from unsustainable growth from exports and different investments into a more steadier expansion from consumer spending. And in the same article, it said that the financial speculators thought the situation was so bad that within 15 days from August 10th to August 25th of 2015, the Dow Jones plummeted 11% on the fears of China's slowing economy. And the questions for thought: why would an economic downturn cause problems for Chinese companies that borrowed heavily? Basically, it would increase their debt for the companies that they borrow money from. And then if the economic downturn occurred, they basically cannot pay that money back, to where they borrow from the money. It basically causes the Chinese companies to crash and potentially fail. And then how do the three statistics that the Chinese official cited in the three different ways calculating GDP. So if the railway shipments are down, the going of intermediate goods are down, which increases GDP. And then electricity consumption results in slowing down, which another affects the GDP. And then the loans disbursed by banks, disbursed by banks, the more loans, basically another slowdown in the economy. And then the business problems that China might have, what business problems might China's untrustworthy numbers create? The problems that arise with China reporting sketchy numbers include loss of business in China, as China would say that they would be not in a recession, but they are, and the business loses money. And then businesses may not want to work in China if they know that they're gonna lose money, basically, if China's not reporting accurate numbers. So that's why they would do independent estimates than relying on China's official numbers. So yeah, and those are.
All right, great, thank you. Thorough. As I would expect from engineering students, very thorough, details. Yeah, just real quick before we do the quiz, I just wanted to comment on a couple things in here. So Social Security, 60 million Americans received. So tying into today's lesson, this is that labor force. If you're on Social Security, you're most likely not in the labor force. If you're on disability, you can't be. And if you are on Social Security retirement, there's actually rules about if you can be in the workforce, very restricted. So this is part of that half of the US population is not in labor force, and this is why. This is how 60 million people survive without being in labor force. Okay, and the other thing about the indexing government programs, so how would you decide to pay people on Social Security or other government benefit programs more money? I mean, how would you do that? Because it seems like anybody that would come up with a way, it would be unfair to everyone. It would be, you would come up with a way that it would, if you're a politician, benefit your constituents the best. So the fair way to do this is through the CPI. So in the laws that create these benefit programs, it says it'll be indexed towards CPI. And then that's what we're talking about it being sensitive. Here is that how you pick that basket of goods will greatly affect large groups of people. So if they pick a basket of goods that it affects 60 million people that are mostly older, what if that basket of goods is tied to video games and beer, or things that younger people? Then it won't accurately affect the needs of the people that need the extra bonus every year, the extra raise. Okay, so that was an excellent presentation. Let's do the quiz now, and just like every time, feel free to quietly leave when the quiz is done. Here's the password.